welcome to the deep dive. I'm so glad you're joining us today.
Yeah, we've got a really great one lined up.
We absolutely do.
Yeah.
So, if you are new to the show, our mission here is pretty simple. We take a stack of source material.
Like articles, research, foundational texts.
Exactly. And we extract the actual functional mechanics hidden inside them. Basically, we are looking for blueprints.
The underlying architecture of the ideas.
Right. And today, we have a genuinely fascinating set of sources. We are diving into a foundational text from the Quran, specifically Surah Al-Furqan, verses 63 through 70.
And this is a massive, but we are analyzing it strictly through the lens of a 20th century thinker named G.A. Parwez.
Yeah, specifically relying on his lectures 14 and 15.
Right, and we should probably clarify our approach right out of the gate here.
Oh, definitely.
We are stripping away all the traditional theology, the centuries of religious sentimentality, the ascetic mysticism that usually surrounds this kind of text.
We're dropping all of that.
Completely. We are going to examine this material as if we were like master sociologists or systems engineers.
Yeah, looking at a literal divine specification for civilizational survival.
Exactly.
And I think that distinction is crucial because, usually when we talk about diagnosing a problem, say a medical diagnosis, there's an expectation of precision.
Right, like an X-ray.
Yeah. If you break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line, the doctor points to it, and the diagnosis is binary. It's either broken or it's not.
But when you step into the world of human behavioral design
and civilizational survival, the X-ray machine gets really murky.
It does.
I mean, for thousands of years, across almost every major human tradition, we've been sold a very specific myth about what the quote-unquote ideal human looks like.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about it. What do the sage, the saint, and the mystic all have in common?
They all leave.
Right.
They withdraw from society.
They completely unplug. The ideal type is almost always defined by how successfully they escape the material world.
Right. The saint goes to the monastery. The sage retreats to the mountain.
Yeah, and the implicit message we've been handed across human history is that the ordinary world-like commerce, family dynamics, politics, community conflict, that all of that is a form of contamination.
A distraction from the ideal.
Exactly. To achieve ideal status, you basically have to transcend the messy, frustrating reality that you and everyone listening to this right now are stuck navigating every single day.
Well, the sources we are dissecting today aggressively dismantle that escapist myth.
They really do.
Verses 63 through 70 of Al-Furqan construct a portrait of a group the text calls the Ibad-ur-Rahman.
Which translates to the servants or agents of the merciful.
Right. But when you actually read the behavioral profile outlined here, it is not a portrait of a monk levitating in a cave.
Not at all.
This ideal type is almost aggressively ordinary.
Yeah, they are completely embedded in the friction of everyday life.
They walk in crowded streets.
They get yelled at by provocateurs.
Right. They have to manage their bank accounts. They get married. They have kids.
They screw up, and they have to fix their mistakes.
Exactly. This is a highly functional, economically active, socially engaged, civilizational type.
It's a blueprint for the mechanics of society, not a retreat from it.
So we can start by looking at the very first behavioral trait the text establishes, which is about physical momentum.
Okay.
It's about how these agents literally move through the world. Verse 63 uses the phrase, Yamshuna ala al-arti hawlan.
And if you look at a conventional translation of that, it will usually say something like, they walk humbly on the earth.
Which instantly pulls us right back into that monastery trope.
Right. If I'm a listener hearing walk humbly, I'm picturing someone with their shoulders slumped, head bowed, just trying to take up as little space as possible.
It sounds like a demand for performative weakness.
Yeah, exactly.
But Parwez argues that the traditional ascetic translation does a massive disservice to the actual systems language being used here.
How so?
Well, we have to look at the socioeconomic reality. Hanan does not mean feigning weakness, and it certainly doesn't mean embracing a poverty mindset. Okay.
Look at the prepositions in the original Arabic. The text says they walk ala alard upon, or over the earth.
Upon the earth.
Right. It implies mastery, competence, what Parwez calls having the upper hand over the material world. They aren't crushed under it.
Oh, that's a huge distinction.
It is. Moving with Hanan means moving with measured weight, dignity, and stability. Let me try to map that onto a modern dynamic, because I think we are deeply culturally conditioned by a false binary of power.
What do you mean?
We tend to think that if you aren't the predator, you must be the prey.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So if you possess power, the expectation is that you display arrogance, what the text calls takabur. You throw your weight around.
Right, you dominate.
But if you aren't doing that, the assumption is that you must be weak and pathetic.
And the text rejects both of those extremes as systemic failures.
Really? Both of them?
Yes. Arrogance is an extractive force. An arrogant actor assumes unearned superiority and exploits others, which breaks down social trust.
That makes sense.
But superstitious humility, this performative, pathetic weakness you just described, is also destructive.
Because it doesn't build anything.
Exactly. A society populated by people pretending to be helpless cannot build infrastructure, defend its borders, or innovate.
Wow.
Both the tyrant and the ascetic drain a society's productive capacity.
I want to dig into that concept of measured weight, though, because I feel like there's a trap there.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we completely strip away the idea of humility, aren't we just giving a philosophical hall pass to, like, corporate arrogance?
How so?
Well, I'm thinking of a certain type of modern executive.
Right.
They walk the halls of their company with this hyper-calm, quote-unquote, measured demeanor. But it's actually a calculated power play.
Right.
They are projecting competence just to intimidate the people under them.
Yeah.
So how do we distinguish Hanan from a slick, dominating executive presence?
That's a really highly relevant distinction. The difference lies in the absence of the ignorant frame.
The ignorant frame.
Yeah. The executive you're describing is still performing. They are puffing their chest out, even if they're doing it subtly, because they have an insecure need to dominate their environment.
Oh, I see.
And from a systems perspective, insecurity is an inefficiency.
Because it burns energy.
Exactly. It requires you to waste energy managing other people's perceptions of your ego.
Right.
Hanan is the complete absence of that performance. It is the walk of an agent who knows their exact place in the productive order.
So basically, because their functional competence is real, they don't have to spend any calories trying to convince you of it.
Precisely. They are neither a parasite draining resources nor a tyrant crushing the components of the system.
Wow.
If you actually possess massive resources, intellect, and authority, and you deploy them without the need to dominate others for ego gratification, that is Hanan.
It is the physical, outward manifestation of an internal systemic equilibrium.
Exactly right.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like the quiet competence of the engineer who knows exactly how the bridge is built versus the loud confidence of the salesman trying to sell you the bridge.
It's a perfect analogy.
But if you're that engineer walking through the messy material world, you aren't walking in a vacuum. You are going to encounter friction.
Oh, inevitably.
And the text anticipates this immediately. The second half of verse 63 says, وَإِذْهَا قَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا.
Right.
Meaning, when the ignorant address them, they respond with salama, or peace.
And this is another moment where we have to rescue the text from passive religious interpretations.
Because responding with peace sounds a lot like turning the other cheek.
Exactly. But saying salana is not a command to be a doormat. It is not turning the other cheek in some submissive surrender.
Okay, so what is it then?
To understand the mechanism here, we have to define who the jahil, the ignorant, actually is in this civilizational blueprint.
Right, because ignorant just means you don't know something, usually.
In modern English, yes. But in the context of pre-Islamic Arabia, the concept of jahiliya wasn't just about a lack of academic knowledge.
How was it?
It was a specific behavioral profile. The jahil was hot-headed, reactive, entirely driven by tribal vengeance and ego.
Oh, okay, so in today's terms, the jahil is the troll.
Yes.
It's the provocateur in your office who CCs your boss on a passive-aggressive email just to start a fight.
Exactly.
It's the person in the comments section trying to drag you into a mudslinging contest. They thrive on unproductive friction.
And when that provocateur attempts to initiate conflict, the civilizational builder responds with salama.
Which is
Think of this as tactical disengagement.
tactical disengagement.
Yes. It is a calculated refusal to allow the jahil's framing to dictate the terms of engagement.
Because if I reply to that passive-aggressive email with my own angry email, or if I start yelling back at the troll, I've just accepted their invitation to play a game on their turf.
You've surrendered your agency to their reactivity.
Man, that is so true.
You are now burning your own system's resources, your time, your focus, your emotional stability, on a conflict that yields zero productive output.
Nothing gets built.
Right. So by saying salama, the Ibad-ur-Rahman disengage from the friction without surrendering their actual position.
It's boundary setting.
It is an active boundary-setting mechanism designed for energy conservation.
Energy conservation. I mean, if you're listening to this and you've ever felt completely exhausted after an hour of arguing with someone who had no intention of actually solving a problem, you know exactly what this means.
You just leaked all your energy into a void.
Yeah. So the text is saying, guard your energy. But that leads to an obvious question. What are we guarding this energy for?
Right.
If we are tactically disengaging during the day, where does that conserved capital go? Which brings us to how these agents utilize the night.
This is such a fascinating pivot in the text. Verse 64 shifts the timeline from the loud, friction-filled daytime to the night.
And traditionally, this is where commentators praise the ideal believer for staying awake all night in ritual prayer, right?
Yes, standing until their feet swell, lost in a mystic trance.
But Parwez applies a radical socioeconomic lens here, too.
He does. He connects it to the broader textual context of the early community. He points out that the night is not meant for sleep deprivation or mindless chanting.
Okay, so what is it for?
The night is for deep work.
Deep work. I think anyone who does intensive knowledge work can relate to this.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the daytime is for administration. It's full of meetings, social friction, the noise of the market. You literally can't do complex systems engineering when your phone is ringing every 5 minutes.
The daytime is chaotic. The night is when the ambient noise of the material rush finally dies down.
Right.
So Parwez argues that the physical postures of prayer mentioned in the verse, the qiyam, which is standing, and sujud, which is prostrating, are actually metaphors for intense intellectual labor.
Oh, really? Metaphors?
Yes. Standing represents holding the line, maintaining the rational framework against opposition. And prostration represents deep, focused submission to the reality of a problem, collaborating with peers to find a solution.
This completely flips the script. The prayer being described here is effectively a boardroom strategy session.
Exactly. It's the night shift for civilizational architects.
They are taking all the data they gathered during the day, like where did the supply chain break down, where is the social friction highest, and they are mapping out the blueprints for the next day.
Furthermore, the text explicitly links this nighttime reflection to the observation of the universe.
How so?
Well, Parwez notes that these individuals study the cosmic laws, the heavens and the earth, and they come to a critical realization.
Which is?
The universe is not absurd. It is not batil. It operates on unyielding, rational laws.
Right. Gravity doesn't care about your ego.
Thermodynamics doesn't care about your tribal affiliation.
Yeah.
So the civilizational builders realize that if the physical universe operates on rational laws, then human society must also be organized according to rational laws.
They are essentially trying to write the software of human society so that it doesn't crash when it hits the hardware of the physical universe.
That is a brilliant way to put it, yes.
And the consequence of failing to do this deep intellectual work is severe, because the subsequent verses talk about avoiding the punishment of hell.
Right.
But if we maintain our sociological lens, hell or Jahannam isn't a fiery pit waiting for you after you die, is it?
Not in this framework. Here, hell is the literal material consequence of a collapsing society.
This is right here on Earth.
Yes, a society that fails to plan, that ignores rational laws, that mismanages its resources and allows social friction to run rampant. It plunges itself into a living hell.
Poverty, warfare, structural dysfunction.
Exactly. It is the natural consequence of ignoring the design parameters.
Okay, we've talked about protecting psychological energy from trolls, and we've talked about deploying mental energy for strategic planning at night.
Right.
Now we have to move from the abstract to the concrete. How do we manage actual physical capital?
Money, resources.
Yes. This is where the blueprint addresses economics. Verse 67 outlines how these agents spend their wealth.
And it says they are neither wasteful, which is Israf, nor are they stingy, which is Yaktaruna or Iktar.
Right. Instead, they find a measured balance between the two, which the text calls Qawam.
And this is perhaps one of the clearest examples of the text acting as an economic systems manual rather than a mere moral guide.
Because it's not just saying don't be greedy.
Exactly. Qawam represents systemic equilibrium. It's about maintaining the circulation of resources within the optimal productive range.
Circulation, that's the key word.
It is. Parwez brings in a highly grounded analogy from regional agricultural practices to explain this.
I love this analogy.
He describes traditional Punjabi farmers managing irrigation channels known locally as Adan.
It's so visual.
Yeah.
Because if you're a farmer and you open the water gate too wide, Or if your channels are leaky and poorly maintained, what happens? The water rushes out uncontrollably.
Right, it goes everywhere.
It floods the dirt paths, it creates mud, it evaporates in the sun, it goes everywhere except to the roots of the crops.
And that is israf.
That's the waste.
Yes. And we can see israf in modern economies constantly.
Oh, all the time.
It is the frivolous deployment of capital into ventures or vanity projects that produce no sustainable yield.
Consumption without production.
Precisely. It weakens the overall reservoir of resources.
But the opposite is equally destructive, right?
Completely. If the farmer gets paranoid about running out of water and completely blocks the gate, hoarding all the water in the reservoir, what happens?
The reservoir looks incredibly full, but the crops die of drought.
And that is ikar. Hoarding wealth depletes the circulation necessary for broader societal health.
So the crops represent the diverse sectors of society, like infrastructure, education, innovation.
Exactly. If the lifeblood of capital is restricted by a few individuals or corporations hoarding it, those sectors just wither and die.
Right.
So Qawam, therefore, is the precision engineering of the irrigation channel.
It delivers the exact right amount of capital at the right pressure to the right sectors, ensuring continuous growth.
Yes. It's macroeconomic stability encoded into individual behavior.
It's essentially saying, don't flood the economy with hyperconsumption, and don't choke the economy with hoarding.
Which brings us to the concept of zakah consciousness.
Right, I wanted to ask about that, because traditionally, zakah is viewed as an annual charity tax you pay to clear your conscience.
Like a religious obligation.
Yeah, but in this systems engineering view, zakah is much more fundamental.
It is. Zakah, at its linguistic root, means growth through purification.
Growth.
Yes, in this context, it is the principle of growth through optimal circulation. The Ibad-ur-Rahman have hard-coded this zakah consciousness into their daily operations.
They understand that acting as a black hole for capital is a systemic failure.
Exactly. They view themselves as nodes in a larger economic network, and their primary responsibility is to ensure the flow of resources remains continuous and productive.
So we have the mechanics of a functional system. But what are the specific vectors that cause a system to collapse?
Ah, the prohibitions.
Right, because a good blueprint doesn't just tell you how to build the machine. It tells you exactly what will break it.
Right.
Verses 68 and 69 lay out three major prohibitions. The don'ts, they are invoking other god systems alongside the rational order, which is called shirk,
Okay.
unjust killing, and extramarital sex, which is called zina.
And again, Parwez insists we read these not as individual sins being tallied up on a cosmic scorecard.
Right, no religious sentimentality.
Right. We read them as specific, identifiable mechanisms of civilizational collapse. These are the inputs that guarantee a system will degrade.
Let's start with shirk. Usually when a modern person hears about idolatry or polytheism, they picture ancient people bowing down to stone statues.
Which feels totally disconnected from modern sociology.
Right, so how does a systems engineer define idolatry?
A systems engineer views shirk as the problem of fragmented loyalty structure.
Fragmented loyalty.
Think about a complex organization. If that society or organization operates under competing ultimate authorities, whether those are literal idols, competing ideologies, superstitions, or just the unchecked egos of various warlords, it cannot execute coordinated, productive action.
It's like trying to run 5 different operating systems on a single server, and each one is trying to overwrite the others.
Right.
The server's going to crash.
Exactly. Or imagine an ant colony where a third of the ants decide to serve a different queen and another third decide to just serve themselves.
Oh, chaos.
The colony collapses because resources are squandered on internal friction rather than outward survival.
Wow.
Monotheism in this socioeconomic reading isn't just about theology. It is about centralizing ultimate authority in a single, rational, universally applicable code of law.
It unifies purpose.
Yes. When loyalty is divided among multiple false authorities, the system fractures.
That makes the second vector, unjust killing, very straightforward to map.
Because it destroys the foundational safety required for an economy to function.
Yes. The text specifically prohibits killing a life that the system has made inviolable except by right meaning, except through the due process of the system's law.
Unjust killing is violence used as a tool for extraction rather than protection.
Right. If violence becomes a normalized way for individuals to extract resources or settle vendettas, trust just evaporates.
People stop building infrastructure. They stop trading. They stop planning for the future because the fruits of their labor can be violently seized at any moment.
The system bleeds out.
Exactly.
Okay, but this brings us to the third prohibition, zina, which is the regulation of sex outside of marriage.
Yes.
And I have to push back here, because this is where the modern mind usually slams on the brakes.
I know, it's a huge pivot.
We've been talking about macroeconomics, loyalty structures, state violence, and suddenly we're talking about who people are allowed to sleep with.
Right.
I mean, this sounds exactly like the kind of puritanical religious overreach we said we were going to avoid. How does regulating human sexuality fit into a master sociologist's blueprint?
It is the most common hurdle for the modern reader, but it is actually the linchpin of the sociological reading.
The linchpin.
Yes. To explain why sexual regulation is a systems engineering issue, Parwez relies on the work of J.D. Unwin.
Okay, who is that?
In 1934, Unwin, who was a British social anthropologist, published a massive data-driven study called Sex and Culture.
Okay.
What makes Unwin so compelling here is that he was a secular progressive. He actually began his research hoping to prove that sexual liberation was a positive force for societal advancement.
Oh, wow. So he went into the data looking for a specific answer.
He did.
What did the data actually show him?
He studied 80 different civilizations spanning 5,000 years of human history.
80 civilizations. That's massive.
And the data forced him to conclude the exact opposite of his hypothesis.
You're kidding.
Unwin discovered a direct, unyielding correlation between the strict regulation of a society's sexual drive and its cultural and civilizational energy.
But how does that mechanism actually work, though? How does regulating a biological drive create civilizational energy?
Well, in this system's view, the family unit is the basic productive and reproductive cell of the social architecture.
Right. It is the atomic level of society.
Exactly. And the sexual drive is arguably the most potent and chaotic biological force in human nature.
For sure.
Unwin argued that when a society enforces strict monogamy, when it forces all of that massive sexual energy to be channeled exclusively into the creation and maintenance of the family unit, it builds immense social energy.
I see. Because that biological drive is being sublimated.
Yes.
Instead of just seeking immediate release, the energy is forced into building a nest, protecting offspring, and contributing to the broader community infrastructure that supports that nest.
Precisely. It creates a robust societal nervous system.
Wow.
The society develops complex infrastructure, creates art, expands, and builds deep resilience because its foundational atomic units are stable and mutually supportive.
So what happens when a society deregulates that drive? When, as the text calls it, zina becomes widespread.
When sexual release becomes easily available outside the family structure, that incredible biological energy just dissipates into the atmosphere.
Leaks out.
The atomic unit splits, the family unit fractures. Children are increasingly born into unstable environments.
And that requires the larger social system to expend massive amounts of resources just to patch the holes and provide basic stability.
Exact.
It's thermodynamics.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you want an engine to drive a heavy vehicle forward, you have to contain the combustion inside the cylinder.
Right.
The explosion pushes the piston, which turns the wheels. But if you just let the fuel burn in an open pan on the street, you get a lot of heat and light for a few seconds. But the vehicle doesn't move an inch.
That is a phenomenal analogy.
The family unit is the cylinder that contains the combustion.
That's exactly it. And Unwin's data showed that within 3 generations of a society deregulating its sexual behavior, it lost its collective willpower.
3 generations.
Yeah.
That's so fast.
It lost its civilizational momentum. Every single society he studied either collapsed internally from dysfunction or was conquered by a neighboring society that still possessed higher social energy.
Which means the prohibition of zina isn't about the text being offended by human pleasure.
Not at all.
It's not prudishness. It's applied physics.
Yes.
It's recognizing that if individuals cannot master their own immediate biological impulses, their internal willpower erodes.
Right.
And if a population lacks internal willpower, it cannot possibly sustain the rigorous, demanding architecture of a complex civilization.
They become slaves to immediate gratification, and an entire society of people seeking immediate gratification cannot build anything that lasts.
Man, that is a profoundly heavy realization. It totally reframes our modern debates about morality.
It really does.
Okay, so we have the design specs for the Ibad-ur-Rahman.
The ideal civilizational agents.
Right. They engage with measured weight, they disengage from trolls, they plan at night, they maintain economic equilibrium, they centralize loyalty, they protect life, and they vigorously defend the social cell by regulating sexual energy.
That's the blueprint.
But we need to talk about reality, because entropy happens. Systems degrade. People are messy.
Very messy.
What happens when an actor in this system falls into those extractive behaviors? Is the system just doomed? Does the blueprint have a recovery sequence?
Oh, it absolutely does. And this is where the architecture reveals its true genius.
Okay.
It introduces a mechanism of change rooted in mukafata yamal.
Which is the law of requital.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've touched on this. It is the unyielding law of cause and effect. In the negative direction, if a society inputs extractive behaviors, the output is systemic collapse.
Right.
But the law of requital is impartial. It runs in both directions with equal precision. Positive inputs lead to systemic construction.
So verse 70 outlines the ultimate recovery sequence for a broken actor or a broken society.
Let's hear it.
It says, except for those who repent, believe, and do righteous work. For them, Allah will replace their evil deeds with good.
Right.
Now, if we aren't careful, we're going to slip right back into religious sentimentality here.
Oh, very easily.
Like, say you're sorry, believe in God, and your sins are magically wiped off the cosmic scorecard. How do we view this through the system's lens?
Well, Parwez breaks down the sequence into 3 distinct operational steps: Tawbah, Iman, and Amal Salih.
Okay, let's walk through those.
Let's look at Tawbah, which is usually translated as repentance. Linguistically, it means to turn back or reorient.
To reorient.
Yes, it is the moment an actor recognizes they are walking down an extractive path and they physically and mentally halt. They stop the bad behavior.
To use our earlier analogy, it's the farmer realizing the irrigation channel is leaking and shutting off the valves so he can assess the damage.
Perfect, yes. The second step is Iman.
Belief.
Right, traditionally translated as belief. But in this functional context, it means a firm commitment to the rational operating framework.
So you've stopped the leak, and now you are consciously adopting the system's blueprint for how the channel should be built.
You commit to the code.
Right. And the third step, Amal Salih, is productive action.
You don't just sit by the broken channel feeling guilty.
You'd pick up a shovel and start rebuilding the walls. Pivot, commit, execute.
Exactly. And when an actor completes that 3-step sequence, it activates the most radical concept in this entire socioeconomic framework.
Which is?
Tabdil.
Tabdil.
The text says their bad deeds are converted or transformed into good ones.
Okay, this is the part I really need to unpack because it bends the mind a little bit.
It does.
How do you convert a bad deed into a good one? I mean, if someone stole money or destroyed infrastructure, that action happened in historical reality.
It's in the ledger.
You can't unring the bell, so how is it transformed?
You have to view it as a vector of energy.
Energy vector, okay.
Imagine an individual who is highly intelligent, incredibly driven, and highly capable, but they have been operating outside the rational framework.
They are a destructive actor.
Yes. All of their immense energy is being used to extract resources and break the system.
Okay, let's conceptualize this with a modern high-stakes analogy. Let's talk about a brilliant, malicious hacker.
Oh, great example.
This person has spent 10 years infiltrating corporate networks, stealing massive amounts of data, exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities, and causing absolute chaos.
A purely extractive actor.
Right. But then they get caught, or they hit a wall. They undergo Tawbah. They realize the destruction they've caused and decide they want to change their trajectory.
They halt.
Then they adopt Iman. They commit to the ethical rules of cybersecurity and the protection of networks.
They commit to the code.
And they begin Amal Salih. They start writing code to patch vulnerabilities. What is the tabdil in this scenario?
The tabdil is that you hire the hacker to build your ultimate cybersecurity defense. The exact same energy, the exact same drive, and critically, the exact same intimate knowledge of how systems break, which was previously organized toward extraction, is now organized toward production. Their past bad deeds, their deep, illicit knowledge of network vulnerabilities, actually becomes the foundational asset for their good deeds, their ability to build an impenetrable defense.
Because without their past as a destructive actor, they wouldn't have the capacity to be such a highly effective protective actor.
Yeah, exactly. The energy vector is flipped.
That is incredible. The system doesn't just erase the hacker's past. It weaponizes the hacker's past for the benefit of the community.
This is systemic reintegration. And it highlights why the social architecture of the Ibad-ur-Rahman is so incredibly resilient.
Because it is an open architecture.
Yes, it is not a closed, elitist club exclusively reserved for perfect people who have been flawless since birth.
Which is good, because a system that requires everyone to be perfect is incredibly fragile.
The moment it encounters the messy reality of human fallibility, it shatters.
But this architecture survives and thrives because it has a built-in, mechanized process to convert destructive actors into productive ones.
The law of requital ensures that the moment you align your actions with the productive order, the moment you execute the Tawbah, Iman, Amal, Salih sequence, the system begins to heal.
It absorbs the shock of your past extraction and converts it into structural strengths.
Exactly.
So if we synthesize this entire deep dive, what are we left with?
A complete paradigm shift.
Truly. We started by looking at Surah Al-Furqan, verses 63 through 70, not as a poem for hermits to recite on a mountain, but as a hard-nosed civilizational design specification.
The Ibad-ur-Rahman, these agents of the merciful, are defined by a very specific operational profile.
They move through the material world with measured competence, refusing both arrogance and performative weakness.
They tactically disengage from unproductive social friction to conserve their energy.
They deploy that conserved energy at night, doing the heavy intellectual lifting of strategic planning.
They maintain a precise economic equilibrium, never hoarding capital and never wasting it.
They refuse to fragment their loyalty, they protect human life, and they rigorously defend the family unit against the dissipation of sexual energy.
And perhaps most importantly, they operate a system capable of reintegrating the broken and the destructive through the transformative process of tabdil.
The overarching takeaway is that these servants of the merciful are not a spiritually elevated, untouchable class looking down on the rest of us from a monastery.
Not at all. They are the mechanics of civilization.
They're the people who have hard-coded these functional laws into their everyday, messy, material reality.
Which is exactly where it matters most.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering, and honestly provocative thought for you to mull over.
Let's hear it.
If the ultimate blueprint for the ideal human type is someone who is deeply embedded in the friction of society, someone who is fixing broken economic systems, regulating their deepest biological drives to build social cohesion, and actively converting destructive actors into productive ones, what does that say about our modern culture? Because if you are listening to this, you are constantly bombarded with the message to unplug.
Constantly.
You are told to retreat, find your inner peace, go on a silent retreat, ignore the news, ignore the noise of the world, and focus entirely on your own personal wellness.
Just withdraw.
But if this text is right, by retreating to find our personal peace, are we actually abandoning the very civilizational machinery we were designed to optimize?
Wow.
The next time you feel the urge to run away from the messiness of the material world, remember this blueprint.
The agents of the functional order don't run.
They walk, with measured weight, right into the center of it.